Welcome to the Sheridan Report, brought to you by MyBookie.ag. To get up to a $1,000 cash bonus on your first deposit, make sure you go to thegruelingtruth.net, click on the MyBookie.ag banner at the top of the page. I am your co-host for the Sheridan Report, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in Bobby Sheridan. How you doing, Bobby?
Good morning, Mike. How are you doing? It's a Friday. We're going to have a big 3-day weekend. Big one coming up here, turning things around.
All righty, Bobby. So let's start off in the NBA.
Let's go to the NBA. I got two games I really like, and, they both have some playoff implications for these two teams that we're picking today. And the first one is the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs are traveling. They're going to go to play the Wizards, and I got 6 on the sheet, and I think it's up a little bit, maybe 6.5 favorite. And the idea here, basically is that the Spurs are in the 8th spot, and they're going to be guaranteed at least there. They played real well. They played good since the All-Star break. We talked about that coming from that rodeo trip and really resurrected their whole year with a 9-game winning streak. And then they went on the road, and they've won 3 of 8 on the in this last 8-game span. They played some really tough teams, but they're dropping down in competition again today. And it's a game they really want to win. To get out of the 8th spot would be important, to play Denver. Even though you got to go to Denver, that's still a much better matchup than going to Golden State. And so they want to win. They want to get in that 7th spot. They've got 4 games to overhaul Oklahoma City, and this is a game they absolutely have to win if they're going to do that. And it's at Washington. And, Washington, I've had a great feel for them all year, whether playing on them or they're doing one of my teams I've been really successful with. And the latest with Washington is that they're playing maybe 2-3 guys, extended minutes that not normally would get much time. And they're doing that because they've had injuries. The latest is to Jabari Parker, who's been a resurrection this year to his career. He's going to get a job next year, whether it's with the Wizards or somebody else. He's slimmed down, and he's really playing great ball. Well, he's out the rest of the year. He's been, other than Beal, their best player in the last month, and he's out, and they're playing extended minutes, as I said, and Spurs will be motivated in this game, and the Wizards just are not playing defense anymore, and they won't be able to score to keep up with San Antonio, and I really like the Spurs. It's a top play for me.
All right, what else you got?
Oh, there's one more I want to mention here on the NBA tonight, and that's the Orlando Magic, and I'm looking up that line right now. That line was 8 on the sheet, and it's up to 9, and that makes sense. The Magic, they've made this big run, and they put themselves in a position now where they control their own destiny. And they've won 8 straight at home. They're going for their 9th, and this is a team that is just really, Miami I was certain was going to get that 8th spot, and Orlando has just overhauled them and just has played better basketball. And the thing I like about this game is where is Atlanta strong? They're strong in the backcourt with Trae Young. He's making a push for the NBA Rookie of the Year, and he's really had a great second half as well. And they have a great player inside in Collins, but their backcourt is what really is making it happen. And the Orlando Magic have a very strong front court. We've talked about that all year. 3 very capable, solid NBA guys in the front court, but their backcourt has been injured. But what's happened? They've got their backcourt playing great right now, and they're playing 8-9 guys, getting great production off the bench, led by Ross. So this is a spot where they're going to win this game. The Hawks have played a lot of basketball games in the Western Conference, and they've covered and they've played pretty well here in the second half, covering some of these spreads, but they've thrown in some clunkers. And the thing about tonight's game is that they're facing a team that's going to be bringing playoff intensity, because the Hawks definitely have their attention. And so you're going to get an A game at home from Orlando. And an A game at home from Orlando has produced great results. It's produced wins and covers. So we like Orlando as well. So that's the 2 plays in the NBA that I'm recommending.
All right. What do you got Major League Baseball-wise tonight, Bobby?
Okay, baseball, we're going to get this thing going in the right direction, Mike. It's been a little bit of a frustration for me and for my people, that follow and are very loyal to my service, and we're 6-5 with the top plays, which is not horrible start. Maybe 6-6 is one or the other, but that's not a horrible start. But the thing is, we haven't been able to put together the 3-team parlays. We hit the first one of the year and have lost maybe 5 or 6 in a row from there, and we haven't been able to put together the sweep, where we hit all 3 or we hit, it's just been kind of a really tough go. Well, we've had the opposite sweeps a couple times in the last, few days, and it's not been fun, but we've been in all these games, and it just seems very frustrating so far, but we're getting a really good read, and sometimes the first few weeks of any new season, there are some reads you need to get, and just I can only assure you that nobody understands winning at baseball better than I do, and nobody follows it more. So we know that it'll turn around in our favor, and we're on the right formula. I think today we've got 3 games starting in the early hours, and one is coming up here, and we should have let off with this. I screwed up. The White Sox are 1 play, and it's 11:10, so there is time. It's 11:06 right now. The White Sox is the first straight wager of the day. They're plus $1.10, and that's an interleague matchup. And then we like the Giants and the Rockies. Those are 1 o'clock hour, 4 o'clock Eastern. So that's our 3 straight plays. They're all small dogs at home. The Rockies against the Dodgers, the Giants with Derek Rodriguez, really high on him today against the Rays. The Rays are traveling. That's my top play. The Rays are traveling from playing in that wacky, stupid ballpark in Tampa, and they're going to go all the way across here to play in San Francisco's home opener today, and it's going to be a much different story for them. And they're facing the Giants. Other than Bumgarner, this is their go-to guy, in my opinion, that we want to be betting on, especially as an underdog. So the Giants are my top play. So Rockies, Giants, White Sox are my 3 straight wagers, all small dogs. And the 3-team parlay we like, this will be 3 favorites. That kind of covers action and hopefully makes this a nice winner today. And that'll be the Braves, Brewers, and Red Sox. Those all start later this evening. Braves at 4:20, Brewers at 5:10, Red Sox at 4:10. This is a 3-teamer. $100 parlay last night when I calculated this paid $458. So almost 5-1 odds.
All right, Bobby. Anything else?
No, I think we're good. We're going to go over the Final Four tomorrow, right, Mike? We're going to have a show tomorrow, correct? So I do have a top play, but we'll go over that tomorrow. And that's it, Mike. We're good.
All right, Bobby. Sounds good. Guys, we're going to take a commercial break, and then we'll be back with On This Day.
Hi, I'm Mike Goodpasser from the Grueling Truth Sports Network, and I'm here with just one simple message. If you're watching the games, it's time to start making money. The Grueling Truth has recently partnered with MyBookie.ag, an industry-leading sportsbook website, who reminds you that where you bet is just as important as who you're betting on, and that's why the Grueling Truth urges you to check out MyBookie.ag. In addition to the usual thousands of odds, money lines, proposition bets, and futures offered on MyBookie.ag daily, they also have in-game live betting and a mobile site that makes wagering on the go easier than ever. So join now, and MyBookie will give you up to a free $1,000 cash bonus on your first deposit. Just enter promo code TGT50, that's TGT50, to take advantage of this offer. You can also go to thegruelingtruth.net, click the banner at the top of the page for MyBookie.ag, and also get the same benefit and the same $1,000 free cash bonus on your first deposit. So visit MyBookie.ag, courtesy of The Grueling Truth, and enjoy winning today. MyBookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid.
All right, guys, I'm Mike Goodpasser, back with Bobby Sheridan here on the Sheridan Report. Bobby, what do we got for On This Day?
On this day, Mike, let's hit 2 of them today, if you don't mind.
Fine.
And the first one is, I'll go in order of the year, 1983. And this was a really cool one I wanted you to talk a little bit about. I read this. It says, New York Mets, Tom Seaver, sets record 14th National League opening day assignment. And I thought, well, Tom Seaver, I know he started with the Mets and then was with the Reds and then went to the White Sox and finished up a year in Boston. I mean, I knew all that. I did not know that he plugged a year there in with the Mets in 83.
Yeah, and Tom Seaver, I think, one of the greatest pitchers of all time. His final record of 311 and 205 doesn't really show how great he was, but most of those Mets teams were not that good he was on. Turned pro in 67, 69, one of his best seasons. That's a 69 Miracle Mets where he went 25 and 7 with an ERA of 2.21, and they pulled off one of the greatest upsets, beating the Baltimore Orioles in 5 games in the World Series. And that was Seaver, Koosman. Who else was a pitcher on that team, Bobby?
Oh, man.
I'm forgetting somebody.
Caught me. Yeah, you're forgetting a big name. Well, Nolan Ryan was on the team, but he was
a relief pitcher because actually he got the save, I think, in Game 3. Then in 1970, he had another great year of 18 and 12, but the Mets weren't that good. He had 2.82 ERA. 1970s, 20 and 10 with a 1.76 ERA. In 73, that was a Mets team that finished like 500 or a game over 500 and played a Reds team that won in the mid-90s and actually upset the Reds because they had Seaver and Koosman each going twice. They won it in Game 5. I think Seaver was the winner in Game 5, but I'm not 100% sure. And then 1977, in the midst of he was 21 and 6 for the year. He was 7 and 3 at the time. And for some reason, the New York Mets traded him to the Cincinnati Reds. I remember one of the guys in that trade was Steve Henderson, who was a big-time Reds prospect. He played for a while for the Mets, but this was one of the bigger steals in Major League history. The rest of the 77 season, he went 14 and 3 with the Reds. He had a down season in 78 of 16 and 14, but it still is an ERA at 2.88. 1979, he was 16 and 6 with an ERA a little over 3, and that was a Reds team that won the National League Western Division. Great pennant race, too. I think they won it by a couple games over the Astros or the Dodgers or maybe even both of them. They went to the playoffs. I think he pitched Game 1, but that was the game where Dave Collins makes the diving catch in center field, and they waved it off and said the ball had bounced. But when you look at the replay, he clearly caught it. But from there,
yeah, I remember this.
Losing Game 1, the Reds came out, lost Game 2 in another close game that was decided at the end. And then they went to Game 3 in Pittsburgh and got beat like 7-1. I think Mike Lacoste or something pitched Game 3. It might have even been Seaver. I don't even remember. That series was kind of a blur for me. I was a Reds fan, and I was upset. I wasn't used to losing playoff series by that time. Then in 1981, he had an amazing season for the Reds, and that was the strike season. He went 14 and 2 with an ERA of 2.5. And that 81 Reds team had the best record in baseball. I think there was something like 66 and 42 or 66 and 44. But that's where they had the split season, and I think the Reds ended up like a game and a half out one half and a half game out on the other. And they got screwed over. The Cardinals got screwed over also because the Cardinals had the best record in the National League East. So it should have been the Reds and the Cardinals. But it wasn't. Instead, it was Philadelphia Phillies and Montreal in the East in a divisional playoff that Montreal ended up winning. And then, of course, the Dodgers beat the Astros in a playoff series. And then Rick Monday's home run in Game 5 in 1981 wrapped that series up. Dodgers went on to beat the Yankees. I think the thing that stands out most to me about Tom Seaver was in 1978. The only no-hitter he threw was at Riverfront Stadium for the Cincinnati Reds, where he no-hit the St. Louis Cardinals. Marty Brennaman and Joe Nuxall called that game. I remember listening to that game. And the great thing is now you can go on YouTube or you can go look at my DVDs, and you can find that game where actually Marty and Joe's radio broadcast is superimposed over it. Kind of like when you were talking about Galen Calvillo and what he did with the old Indiana games. Yeah, same thing, and it's really cool to hear Marty and Joe on the radio do that game. In 1982, he was a part of probably the worst Reds team in history, where the Reds, I think, went 60 and 102 that year. So that was a rough year.
Did Sparky coach that 82 team, or had he gone on?
Sparky was gone after the 1978 season. And so a lot of people thought maybe it wasn't that bad of a move because 1979 they won the division. John McNamara, who ended up being the manager for the Boston Red Sox in 1986 when they lost that heartbreaking World Series to the New York Mets, was actually the manager for the Reds in 79. and he managed the Reds up through 81. I don't remember why he left after the strike season. They had the best record in baseball. But in 1982, they made longtime Reds assistant coach, whatever you call baseball assistant coach, Russ Nixon the coach, and the Reds were god-awful. And Seaver, it was the worst year he ever had. It's the worst year he had. He was better later on in his career even. He had an ERA of 5.5. And then the New York Mets getting back in 83. And as you said, he started opening day. He went 9-14. His ERA was 3.5. And it looked like his career was over. He goes to the Chicago White Sox in 1984 and 85. And if you remember, the White Sox, going into the 1984 season, were one of the favorites to at least win their division, if not more, because in 1983, they'd made it to the American League Championship Series and lost to the eventual world champion Baltimore Orioles in 4 games. The 84 season,
That's right.
the 84 season, he went 15-11. ERA wasn't great. For today, it would be great at 3.9. And then his final 2 seasons, 1985, he was a White Sox, and he goes 16-11 with a 3.1 ERA. And this is like 20 years into his career. 1986, he started off with the White Sox. Now, here's the interesting thing that I don't think many people remember. The White Sox traded him when he was 2-6 with a 4.3 ERA to the Boston Red Sox. So Tom Seaver actually finished his career with the Boston Red Sox. He went 5-7 on that division-winning team and with an ERA of 3.8. I don't think he was even on the playoff roster or the World Series roster for him in 1986, but he was a part of that team. He did win 5 games to help him get there. But I think Tom Seaver's one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Hell, can you imagine the numbers he'd have put up if he would have been with Cincinnati from 1969 through 1980?
Oh man, I know, because he had some bad teams there with the Mets, and you know, I did remember I remembered him finishing in Boston, and I know I think you're right, he was not on that roster for the playoffs in '86, but going back to '84, the good season he had, you're right, that was Tony La Russa, correct, and they had a really good team, the White Sox.
Yeah, that was the team of Harold Baines and all those. Who was the big white dude? Ron Kittle. Ron Kittle. You remember Ron Kittle?
Yeah. Ron Kittle was 85 rookie in 85, I believe.
Oh, was he? All right. I thought he was on the 83 team.
Oh, shoot. Maybe you're right.
I don't know if I'm right or not. I'm just guessing. It sticks out to me that he may have been.
Well, he was a rookie of the year there, but why I thought 85, I don't know. Maybe it was 83. But no, you're right, and that was a good team, and no, what a year. And I like I said, I remember.
The interesting thing about that White Sox team that I just remembered was Jerry Reinsdorf was the owner. You remember he was part owner of the Bulls when they did their
who went on to
Michael Jordan.
8 years later, started winning multiple championships when somebody put something together with. Of course, Jordan was there years before they won the championships. It didn't happen.
I'm trying to remember who was on the '83 team. I know Harold Baines played right field. I think Rudy Law was in center. All right. The big white guy I was thinking of was Greg Luzinski, I think, was the DH for them that year.
Luzinski, yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, they had Carlton Fisk, Vance Law. I think the first baseman was Greg Walker. I think Tom Paciorek was on that team, too.
Tom Paciorek was on that team, yeah.
Okay, but the thing that stands out to me is they won like 99 games, and I think they might even been the favorite over Baltimore because they wrapped that division up. Seemed like they clinched it at the end of August,
very
start
early,
of
right?
September.
That was American League West when there was only just 2 divisions, right?
Yeah, which is the way it should be.
Yeah.
And I am pretty sure Ron Kittle was on that team.
You might be right. I might be wrong.
I think he was the rookie of the year in 1983.
Yeah, I second guessed myself after I said that. I think you're right.
And then I think you just
remember how you talked about baseball cards, Mike? Remember how we had a discussion on baseball cards? I can see his rookie of the year card on a Donruss, and I think it's 83. You know, because you know we memorized those cards by the look. You know, every year had a different look, and I can see it. I can picture 83 Donruss Ron Kittle. So I think you're right. I think it's 83.
Yeah, and I think
Or
he's one of
84.
those guys
I
that
think
the
84.
year he won Rookie of the Year, I think he had a pretty high batting average with a ton of home runs. And I don't think the home runs ever really dropped off for him, but the batting average did because I think he ended up in the 240s or the 230s even for a lifetime batting average.
Yeah, it happens. You go back in history and you look at some of the rookies of the year.
Joe Charbonneau, Cleveland Indians, 1980. I still
right.
remember Super Joe Charbonneau.
That's right. There's lots of them. And, every organization, depending on which organization you follow, a lot of their top prospects don't always pan out at the major league level. And,
and then you got guys like Mike Piazza were drafted in like the 50th round that turned out to be Hall of Famers.
Have to be Hall of Famers, Mike. And I'm going to give you a little tidbit here. I pitched against Mike Piazza in the minor leagues, and it was the second to last game that I threw in. And he was the only guy that got an extra base hit on me. It was a double in the gap in left center, but I did get him out 2 times that game. And I made a really nice play backing up a base, which, as a pitcher, you're backing up a base. That's not good. That means you gave up something. But I backed up a base. And threw a guy out. And I still remember it. And I didn't have much of a minor league career, as we've talked about, because I had those injuries. But I did face Mike Piazza, and I faced Ben Ogilvy, too. And I struck him out.
From the Milwaukee Brewers.
So, that's right. I faced him in a spring training type situation. It was some sort of league. I'm trying to remember now when it would be. Maybe it was just before short season, so it would have been maybe in May. And you're at the complex getting ready to start the short season, which is in June after the draft. And I faced him, and it would have been.
I got you one. How about this? You just talked about short season. You remember when Bill Veeck was with the White Sox in the mid to late 70s, and they used to wear the shorts instead of the game pants?
Yeah. I think that was 78 they did that the year they tried that, or 79 maybe.
Yeah, that makes sliding rough.
Yeah, I remember the disco night.
Yeah, the disco night, then between games of the doubleheader, and it got so out of control they couldn't even play the second game of the doubleheader.
So is that Bill Veeck that did all that? Was Bill Veeck, right?
Yeah, that was Bill Veeck was the GM. I don't know if he was the owner or what, but yeah, he was always entertaining. Hardly ever won.
Yeah.
He was always entertaining. All right, what else you got, Bobby?
All right, we got one more I wanted to go over today. Do we have time, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so 1993 was the 55th championship. It was we talked about the 50th yesterday with 88 with Kansas. So this is 93, so it's a 55th. And North Carolina won this game. They beat Michigan 77-71, 1993.
Yeah, and I think that was Dean Smith's first national championship, wasn't it?
I think so. I mean, I'm first or second. Like, did he win one in the 80s? I don't think he did, right?
No, he got his ass beat in the 80s a lot. But that North Carolina team was a great team. And I just remember they blew out East Carolina, Rhode Island right away. They had a fairly close game against Arkansas. And then in the Elite Eight, they played Nicky Van Exel and the Cincinnati Bearcats. And I'm pretty sure that was an overtime game that UC let it get away at the end. That's what took them to the Final Four. There was no upsets in that bracket at all. When we go to the Midwest region, the number 1 seed was the Indiana Hoosiers. They played at the Hoosier Dome. And they played in the second round. Almost got upset by the Xavier Musketeers, who were the 9th seed. It was 73-70. Indiana then went on and beat Louisville. The thing that stood out to me here was Jason Kidd, because in the second round in the Midwest bracket, California played Duke. Duke was the 3rd seed. California was the 6th seed, but Duke was a pretty heavy favorite at that time. They were coming off winning back-to-back national championships, and Jason Kidd kind of put himself in a national spotlight for the first time when they upset Duke 82-77 behind Kidd. And then after that, they come out, they get beat by Kansas. So Indiana plays Kansas in the Elite Eight. IU's probably a small favorite. Kansas beats them by 6 points to go on. But this was a tournament that was pretty much devoid of any upsets. I mean, because I'm trying to think. I don't think there was any upsets in this bracket.
Well, can we back up a second, Mike?
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to just talk a little bit about the Indiana game. That was the final game of Calvert Chaney in that group, right? And they won a game that year. It was one of the best regular seasons that Knight had. I mean, there was a few great ones, but I mean, this was one of the great ones. And they lost in the Elite Eight. And Alan Henderson, was he out of that? Did he not participate? Right?
I can't remember if he didn't play or he just played a little bit, because I know the Indiana Xavier game he came in and I think he did play some. So I think he might have played in those games, but it wasn't much, and it was nowhere near 100% Alan Henderson.
Right. And so that really, when you talk about some of the ones that got away, Knight won 3 and could have won maybe 6, 75, definitely with that injury to May, and then this injury to Henderson, could have prevented it, because they beat Michigan that year a couple times.
You know what I would like to see, and it's one we talked about the other day. In 1984, Indiana lost to Virginia in the Elite Eight. I'd have loved to seen Indiana with a week to prepare play Phi Slamma Jam and Guy V. Lewis in the Final Four. Because if you remember, Virginia took them to overtime with Terry Holland, who was a hell of a basketball coach too. I think Indiana may have beat them, and it would have set up an Indiana-Georgetown national championship game that I think would have been bad, because I don't think IU wins that game, because I think Georgetown had way too much power, and that IU team was pretty young that year. I think they usually had 3 or 4 freshmen on the court, but those freshmen were guys like Steve Alford, who we had on Survive and Advance yesterday, who ended up winning a national championship a few years later. And I do remember an upset in this tournament. I can't believe that I forgot about it, because in 91, you had the first time a 15 ever beat a 2 when Dick Tarrant took Richmond and beat Syracuse. Now, 1993 was the year Santa Clara with Steve Nash upset number 2 seed Arizona 64-61 in Salt Lake City. Santa Clara went on to lose to Temple there. Temple actually played Vanderbilt in the Sweet 16, and Temple went on to the Elite Eight to play the Fab Five. The Fab Five, the thing that was interesting about that year was 1993 was the year. Who was the guy that took the ball to length of the court to win the game? 86-84, Michigan UCLA. I don't even remember. But Michigan beats UCLA by 2. They beat George Washington.
Well, wasn't it for UCLA?
Huh?
You were asked about the length of the floor. Was that UCLA or was that Michigan that you're talking about?
It was Michigan that won the game.
Oh.
I think you had
game, so I forget.
Yeah, a year or two later, like Tyus Edney did it, UCLA actually beat Michigan that way. But this year, Michigan beat UCLA that way. Michigan beats Temple 77-72 to go to the Final Four. And then Kentucky, this was Pitino's team. They were coming off the Christian Laettner shot loss. And they blew out Rider by 40. They beat Utah by 20. They beat a really good Wake Forest team. I think Tim Duncan would Duncan have been on that team then?
That year,
I think he was. What, 93?
Oh man. Well, Duncan just retired how long ago from San Antonio? Maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah, so it might have been. But either way,
it might have been.
Kentucky beat the living shit out of them, beat them 103-69, and then they played Florida State, who had Charlie Ward, and I think Bob Sura. I don't know why the name Bob Sura just popped into my head.
Sura, yeah.
But Bob Sura, and Kentucky beat them, huh?
And Sam Cassell.
Yeah, Sam Cassell is a really good Florida State team. And Florida State the year before had lost in the Sweet 16 to Bobby Knight in Indiana. And that set up a Final Four, I guess you could say a power Final Four, because you had, the Fab Five, Kentucky, North Carolina. It doesn't get much better than that, I don't think, Bobby. And that Final Four didn't disappoint. I remember, I think my favorite game of that tournament, of course, was Kentucky playing Michigan, because, of course, as I like to bring up on every show, I really hate the Kentucky Wildcats, but Michigan beat them 81-78 in overtime in an outstanding game. I think it was Chris Webber dropped like 27, Jalen Rose had 18, Juwan Howard had 17, and Kentucky, this was a team with Travis Ford, who was a great shooter. But the difference in this game was Travis Ford was only like 3 for 10 from the field. Jamal Mashburn, who was a great player, kept them in the game. I think he scored like 26 or 30 points. But we got what we wanted because, of course, Kentucky lost. And anytime Kentucky loses, it's good. And I remember that day. I remember that day really well because that's the day I tore my knee and my ankle up playing in a 3-on-3 basketball tournament. And I remember going home and throbbing ass pain, but Kentucky losing made me feel a lot better.
Yeah, things turned around a little bit that night.
Yeah, and then you had North.
You were dying.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I felt pretty good after that. Anytime Kentucky loses, I feel pretty good. And North Carolina beat Kansas 78-68 in the other Final Four game, which I don't think, from what I remember, I don't think the game was as close as the score would indicate. I just remember Rex Walters. You remember Rex Walters, Adonis Jordan for Kansas. They were outmatched. George Lynch scored 14. Donald Williams had 25. You remember Eric Montross, who was from Lawrence North, not to be confused with Lawrence Central, but was a great high school player in the state of Indiana. And that set up a national championship game that I don't think people will ever forget between UNC and Michigan. The final score was 77-71. But that's not what people will remember. There was actually a close game. Michigan had the ball with the clock running out. And, of course, Chris Webber calls a timeout that they don't have. And the rest is basically history. But in that game, Chris Webber dropped 23 points. Jalen Rose had 12. Jimmy King, 15. Juwan Howard, 7. North Carolina was led by Donald Williams, who was on fire that night. I think he shot like 8 for 12 from the field, something like that. Montrose played well. Lynch played well. In the end, I think Dean Smith was a better coach than Steve Fisher. And I don't really blame Chris Webber because when you go back and watch that film, there's people on the bench telling him to call timeout also.
Yeah, that gets so much of a thing of a notice that happened. But you're right. I think there was being some voice he was hearing.
Oh, okay. Lucas Weiss wants to bring up that Dean Smith won in 1982. Come on, Mike. I'm just, Steve Nash is a Canadian, and like Canadians, Lucas, he gave you some hope for a while, but the next round he crashed and he burned and never got out of the second round.
But you know what, Mike? When you said,
hey, Bobby, did Steve Nash, the Canadian, ever win an NBA championship?
No, he did not.
Okay, so it's not hockey, Lucas. Be quiet. Go ahead, Bobby.
Hey, I love Lucas. He's the best. He does a great job. Of course,
he's top 3.
He does a great job. I was introduced to him through your show, of course, and I love it. He writes for Last Word on Sports, I think it's called. Look him up. He does a great job, and he's a great tweeter of all sports, not just Canada. But he is Canadian, of course, and that reigns supreme up there.
Plus, he is our main contributor when the Iditarod happens every year because Risley thinks it's in Canada.
Yeah. So he does the Iditarod, and I'll have to take responsibility too because it seemed like he won one in the 80s, but I thought, okay, well maybe you're right, maybe that was because I know he got 2, right? I was trying to think, well, when did he get the other one? If that was, I don't know.
I forgot they won in 1982 because Georgetown was the better team. It was just Freddie Brown threw the ball to the wrong team.
Well, yeah, and what's funny is we talked about that. We did go over the 82 final, a few weeks ago. I think we just brain cramped a little bit, and we both did. I should have picked that up and picked you up, but I screwed up. But you know what? You're so darn smart, and you know everything.
I know. I'm freaking brilliant, so when I make mistakes, it usually just goes unnoticed unless there's some Canadian listening to the show.
That is the problem.
Jeez. I'll tell you what, though. I do know this. He only knows it because it was North Carolina, because today when we had Poncho Wright on, him and Steve were real quiet. I don't think either one of them knew much about 1980 Louisville. There was no Canadians on the 80 Cardinals.
No, there wasn't.
Which is why they won.
But I want to mention 2 things, Mike, before I forget, because 2 things were brewing in my mind. You talked about what a great matchup 84 night against Phi Sigma Gamma. Well, what about 93? If Indiana gets by Kansas, that would have been a rematch with Dean Smith.
Oh, yeah, but Indiana, with a healthy Allen Henderson, would have beaten Dean Smith because Bobby Knight, with a week to prepare, would beat Dean Smith all day long. Remember,
Yeah, well,
remember
he'd already been
this.
a
In
right.
1981, they played in the finals, and 1981 was a season where, in the regular season, I said in 1981 was a season where Indiana lost at Chapel Hill by like 9 points early in that season. But by the time you get to the end of the year, Indiana wins by 13. Basically, what happened in that game was Bob Knight took a team with Steve Risley and beat Dean Smith's team with James Worthy.
Yeah, so he definitely would have won. There's no way.
That's mean. I mean, you also had Phil Eisenberger, Chuck Franz, and I think there was a guy by the name of Isaiah Thomas on that team too, which probably didn't hurt.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's always games that you would like to know what would have happened in the tournament.
Yeah.
And, that is a big one. Yeah, because I think that a Final Four game between Indiana and North Carolina would have been a hell of a game. I think that IU team was the best team in the country that year, though, and then Henderson got hurt because they were loaded.
Right.
I mean, you had Damon Bailey, you had Allen Henderson. I mean, that was a hell of a basketball team.
It was a great team. The center, Nover, had really come together really well. And
plus, he's a brilliant actor if you saw him in Blue Chips.
Yeah, and then how can you not mention Greg Graham? What a great job he did. And
yeah, Pat Graham was on that team too, wasn't he?
Who?
Pat Graham?
Pat Knight? Oh,
Pat Graham.
Oh, yeah, Pat Graham. Yeah, Pat Graham. And, he was really – I listened to Knight talk about him as being a really good offensive player, an Indiana-type player.
Well, I can tell you this. The first time I ever saw Pat Graham was in the Seymour Regional, and his team played Bedford North Lawrence, which was Damon Bailey's team. And I think it was the only year that Bailey's team didn't make it to the semi-state because in that regional, I think Pat Graham scored like 44 points. Damon scored like 42. And I think that Pat Graham played for Floyd Central High School, and they upset Damon Bailey and Bedford North Lawrence.
Wow. Yeah. Yes. Great team. When I go back and I watch a lot of the old clips, I do watch a lot of games from that season, and that was one that got away. And there's something else I wanted to mention about this final. The Fab Five losing to Dean Smith, 77-71. The three main guys from that Fab Five, Juwan Howard, Jalen Rose, and of course Chris Webber. I don't care about Michigan, and there's no affinity there, but I think it's a pretty neat story. Those three guys turned out to be not only really good players, but look what they're doing with themselves. I mean, Juwan Howard's had a long career. He had the longest career playing, and now he's in the NBA still coaching. And Weber, you can hear on the NBA telecast on the NBA channel, he does a really good job, really well-spoken, articulate. And then Jalen Rose, you want to talk about well-spoken, he does ESPN shows, and he's great on there. I mean, those three
Wait a
guys,
second, though. Stephen A. Smith's on ESPN, and he's not well-spoken. That doesn't mean you're well-spoken just because you're on ESPN.
He's a jackass, but I mean, Jalen Rose is a player. He's the real deal. He speaks. That's a pretty good group. And
well, I think Jimmy King played in the NFL or NBA too, didn't he?
I don't remember if he did or he didn't. I don't remember what really happened with the other two guys, Jimmy King and Ray. Who was the fifth one? Ray, was it Jimmy King and
Ray Jackson.
Ray Jackson, right?
They had a dude by the name of Eric Riley who played in the NBA too, who was the sixth man.
Right, who get this, started the year before, and I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe he led the Big Ten in rebounding.
Who, Riley?
The year before, yes, and then couldn't make the starting lineup the next year with the Fab Five. You talk about it. I mean, can you imagine doing that, putting a guy who led the league and rebounding on the bench? And
well,
being
they also had a dude by the name of Rob Pelinka, who was a really good player also.
Yes. Now is that the guy? Is that the same Rob Pelinka who works with the Magic Johnson now with the Lakers?
I have no
I don't know.
idea, but I know Rob
Well,
Pelinka could play, and Pelinka was a senior on that year or on that team. I think Pelinka was on the team in 1990, and actually he might even been a starter when he was a freshman. But in 1990, if you remember, Loyola Marymount beat Michigan like 149 to 115 or something in the second round of the NCAA tournament. And Rob Pelinka played on that team. And another guy that was on the 93 team, this is an Indiana connection, was Dugan Fife, which of course is Dane Fife's brother.
yes, yes. I looked up Rob Pelinka, an American team executive, player, sports agent, and former college basketball player from Lake Bluff, Illinois. He's currently the general manager of the Lakers.
Okay, so
Wow.
I guess most of that team turned out all right. And I remember they had a big white dude named James Bosco, too, who had played a lot his first 2 years, but once the Fab Five got there, he didn't see the court very often after that.
You know what, Mike? You know what I love about this show, and here I am, I'm participating in it. But if I was a listener, Mike, you learn something every day. Every time I'm talking to you or listening to you on one of the shows, I learned something, and I've been a lifelong fan, of sports, and I think I know a lot, and I learn something every day. Rob Pelinka, that's the same Rob Pelinka. I didn't even know he played at Michigan. Wow.
Yeah.
That's very good. Very cool, Mike.
That's what I'm here for. And Lucas wanted me to bring up that on this day, 2010, Duke beat Butler for the national championship.
Yes, they did. I did have that listed. If you look.
Oh man, and that Gordon Hayward almost won the national championship on a half-court shot too, which would have been pretty impressive.
Yeah, I had that listed, Mike. That was down 2010. Well, on this day too, Connecticut beat Georgia Tech in 2004, and then I got another.
Connecticut Georgia Tech was the worst matchup in NCAA championship history, I think.
I don't remember much about it. We didn't
really see exactly. That's why.
but also,
and that was Connecticut, coached by the scumbag Jim Calhoun.
Yep. And let me tell you two other things that happened on this day. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar broke Wilt Chamberlain's record for points. Okay, he did it on this day. I think it was a sky hook in Utah, if I remember correctly. In 1972. The MLB season failed to open due to a players' strike. This was the first time in history. And 86 games were lost before the dispute was settled. This is 72 on this day. So this is a big day in sports. And the Chicago White Sox, karma's changing, Mike. We're up 3-1. It's bottom of the first, and it's still no out.
Hey, you know what, though? This brings me to this. We just talked about the 2010 championship game between Duke and Butler. I still believe Butler was the better basketball team. Because the thing that stood out to me in that game was Gordon Howard was terrible in that game. He was like 2 for 11 and scored 12 points. And really, the only thing that kept him in the game, from what I remember, was Shelvin Mack and Matt Howard. And Matt Howard rebounded the ball. I think he scored like 11 points. But the thing that's big is Gordon Hayward was the leading scorer for them at 12 points. And I think their starters only scored like 33 of their 59 points in that game. I'm not sure, but I think it was something like that.
Interesting you just brought that up, because yesterday's Lipscomb-Texas game, where Texas beat Lipscomb, Lipscomb's best player, Matthews, who averages like 30 a game, he shot 2 for 10 and 1 for 5 from three-point range.
Yeah.
And so, Mike, sometimes, if you have a guy, just come up flat in a ball game, it's really tough to overcome.
Especially when it's your main guy. Decent. I mean, we talked about 1979 when Larry Bird misses like 4 free throws in the second half, and a couple of them are where they could have pulled within a point. You wouldn't expect that to happen in a Duke team. As Lucas, just messaged me. I mean, the only person anybody remembers from there was Kyle Singler, and I don't even remember Kyle Singler. I mean, the only guy I remember from that team was Brian Zubak, and it's just because he had a stupid name.
Crazy. Isn't that crazy? And is that the this is a weird question, but is that of Krzyzewski's rings? I mean, what number was that? I mean, does he have any since then?
They won it in like 2014 or 15, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe Lucas knows. He's younger than me. And Lucas, this is why we don't bring things like 2010 up. I remember the championship game, but I can't give you the whole history of the entire tournament. Anything after the mid 90s, I'm pretty much lost because I lost a lot of interest. But I can tell you this, the interest was brought back to me because I've been to the first four in the first couple rounds the last few years. But that regional semifinal game between Virginia and Purdue, or not Virginia, it was Purdue and Tennessee. It was just, it was something to be at. And yes, Lucas is correct. 2015, Duke beat Wisconsin because Duke, or if I remember, wasn't that the year that Wisconsin was or Kentucky was undefeated and Wisconsin upset them in the Final Four?
This is 2015?
I think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I think it was.
I'd have to look it up again because it's so recent. And
it was either 2014 or 2015, one to two. But hey, anytime the Kentucky Wildcats lose, I'm happy, and I'm pretty sure it was that. Yeah, okay. And see, the thing I remember about that is I was coaching an arena football team in Kentucky, and we had won our game to actually clinch a playoff spot, and we went to the restaurant where they used to have the after-party dinner for the team, and all the fans would come and all that, and we get there, and the place is already packed with all these Kentucky Wildcat fans, and we sit there, and I'm eating my free chicken wings, drinking water, and I'm watching the game. And it was just awesome, the emotion that those Kentucky people showed. And at the end, when Wisconsin won, to watch like 30 old biker-looking dudes actually crying and holding each other up was maybe the greatest moment of my life. And if their wife/sisters weren't there to drive them home, I don't think they would have made it.
Well, I'm glad that they did make it, Mike, and I'm glad Kentucky lost that night too. So,
me too.
That's a good memory.
Anytime Kentucky loses is a good night. I was almost upset that they lost to Auburn last week because I think Virginia would have completely humiliated them, which I was really looking forward to.
Well, let's see if we'll talk about those games tomorrow. I have a strong opinion on one of them, and an opinion on the other, but a strong one, and on the other, and let me ask you, did you guys win your Arena League game that night?
Yeah, we clinched a playoff spot. We beat Chicago 78 to like 54, something like that. I got 3 personal fouls in that game too for yelling at officials. And you can find the game on YouTube if you want. Just put in River Monsters versus the Blitz. So, all right, guys.
River Monsters versus the Blitz. All right. Now, how did it turn out that season?
We lost in the championship game because we get to the championship. We're getting ready to leave on the bus for the championship game, and my quarterback comes limping in. He was the guy that replaced Jared Lorenzen, and he's got a strainer with him. And I'm like, what the hell is he doing? And he comes up to me, and he goes, Coach, he says, I've got stones. He said, it hurts when I do anything. I'm thinking, son of a bitch. And then he looks at me, he says, Coach, I know you've already kicked guys off the team for doing this before you, but he says, do you care if I smoke a little weed out behind the bus when we get to where the stadium is that we're playing the game? He said, because I need some pain relief. And he said, I don't really want to take Vicodin. So I'm like, yeah, I don't really give a shit, as long as you can play that way. Because it's a championship game. And, you know, at that point, your moral compass drops off a lot. And we get there,
right,
and we're eating our team meal. And my assistant coach comes, sits down. He says, Coach, you know our quarterback's out back smoking weed. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, why are you letting him do that? You cut other people when they do stuff like that. I said, cause this is the championship game. I ain't got a backup quarterback. And if that'll get him through and get us a win, that's all I care about. But in the end, we lost 54-40 in a game marred by multiple brawls, which I don't know. I think it says a lot about the teams that we play, that a lot of times we would get in brawls and we'd get a lot of penalties. I just think that other teams need to chill out because it really made us look bad that it happened almost every time we played.
Oh, Mike, you're the best, and I wish you guys. I really do.
All right. Lucas Weiss is the best. So make sure you check out our last two Surviving Advances. Yesterday, me and Steve had Steve Alford from the 1987 National Championship Indiana Hoosiers, and he was also a starter on the 1984 Olympic team in the same backcourt with Michael Jordan. And today we had 1980 National Champion Poncho Wright, who played for the Louisville Cardinals, that great Darrell Griffith team that upset Kiki Vanaway and UCLA in 59-55 in the national championship game. Make sure you check out both of those shows. I want to remind you, you can follow the Sheridan Report at Sheridan Report or the SheridanReport.com on the internet. $10 a day will get you a daily Sheridan Report. $50 a month will get you the entire month of reports. Take that, go over to MyBookie.ag, click on the banner at the top of the GrillingTruth.net for MyBookie.ag, and it will get you up to a $1,000 cashback bonus on the first 50% you deposit. So if you deposit $3,000 or $2,000, you'll have $3,000 to play with once you're done. All right, guys, we are going to wrap this show up, and I want to remind you can hear us pretty much anywhere podcasts are played, but definitely you can hear us on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube, any place you hear a sports podcast, you will find The Grueling Truth. So for our wonderful listener and contributor, Lucas Weiss, Bobby Sheridan, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth. We're Americans. We're not Canadians.